Before we jump into this episode, I want to remind you that while Caitlin and Sophia are dietitians, we're not your dietitians. This means the information shared in the Food Freedom Fertility podcast is intended to entertain, educate, and inform. It is not a substitute for medical care. This information is not intended to diagnose, manage, or treat disease. Always consult with your doctor before making any changes.
Another episode of Food, Freedom, and Fertility. Sophia and I are here today, your functional nutrition besties, and we have another functional nutrition bestie in the house, Kaely McDevitt. Kaely, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yes. Okay, so I said I wasn't going to read her bio before we hit record. I would just highlight it, but actually I just reread it, and I like it enough that we're just going to read it.
It's succinct.
Honored.
Good work making a succinct bio.
And
that was the
just
plan.
Powerful too. I think sometimes people's bios are like, this is what I did and this is who I am, and it's not, this is what I do. And then this is cool.
I need to make mine more like that. Like, no one gives a crap where you went to college. Like, why is that in there? That I end up trying to make it like a mini resume. Anyway, what about me? Okay, Kaely, let's hear your bio.
Kaely McDevitt is a registered dietitian specializing in nutrition for women's health. She owns a virtual private practice where she and her team help clients reclaim their energy, optimize fertility, and overcome hormone symptoms through personalized nutrition. Having experienced the pitfalls of a conventional approach to women's health firsthand, as we all have, Kaely is passionate about empowering women to build health from a place of connection to self, to nature, and to community. And I just love that about you.
Oh, thank you.
So we're all excited, the three of us here today, because this is our third attempt at recording. It's actually happening. So yay.
Third time's the charm.
Totally. We invited Kaely today because I kind of have, as we always do with our crushes on this podcast, like a little bit of a work crush on her, because she is not only helping women one-on-one, but she teaches a course to practitioners on how to optimize and use lab work in their practice to help people design interventions and really achieve better health. And I have a couple friends that were within your first round of that
awesome.
lab work course. And though we don't make this podcast for practitioners, I always think it's really great when we have an expert on that not only treats and has like that boots on the ground experience with patients, but is also helping arm other practitioners do their job really well and really multiply their impact. So we're super excited, Kaely, to have you here. And that's what we're going to chat about today is lab work and kind of like breaking it down. Why is lab work really important for us to have an individualized approach for someone?
Yeah, I think a good way to think of lab work is seeing what the eye can't, right? Like we can do all kinds of physical assessments, we can do food logs and look at how people are eating, but we're not necessarily going to know the intricacies of how their physiology has been impacted by the way they live. So I got exposed to lab testing just on like a complete accident. I couldn't find a job when I first got my RD. I was like applying to all the clinical stuff like we were told we were supposed to and wasn't getting interviews, and saw this like startup corporate wellness company that was hiring. And I was like, pick me, please take me. And in that role, we were doing functional lab interpretations for their corporate clients twice a year. It was like, I've never seen any program like this before. And I got exposed to what it would look like to be really proactive with lab testing and how we could get in front of like gradual disease development over time. And once I saw what we could do as nutrition professionals with inside information, I really couldn't go back. I had a couple jobs between that and private practice where we didn't have access to testing, and I felt a bit like I was flying blind. So in a time where we have so much access to nutrition information and it's hard to figure out what the heck applies to me, I think lab testing helps whittle down what does apply to you so we don't have to guess so much and do so much like throwing things at the wall to see what sticks.
Certainly there's
Again,
so much.
So succinct. I love that explanation.
Appreciate it.
Kaely can take information and distill it down to the important things. So this episode should be one to really tune into, guys. when I think about what you just said, I think about how everybody potentially has access to go get kind of a 10,000-foot view, maybe at an annual checkup with a physician, where they look at something like a comprehensive metabolic panel. They're looking at CBCs. They might pull something like an A1C or a couple other things based on your past diagnoses. But can you talk a little bit from your perspective of what like an annual physical generic lab request is going to show you versus what else is out there?
Yeah, and I actually really like to make use of those basic labs too. I think because they're so accessible, a lot of times they're covered by our insurance. A lot of our clients come in with this type of testing already. And I think, the first recommendation I'd make is let's pull everything we can out of what we have. So that involves looking at those basic markers like CBC, CMP, lipid panel, that kind of stuff with a fine-tooth comb. And what I think is missed in the conventional care model is this opportunity to catch things as they trend slightly outside of the norm. General screenings and annual physicals are there to catch pathology, to find a problem, not to help someone really be optimal with their health. So we can first look at those basic labs. We can look closer at them with a narrower reference range. One of the things that we like to use basic lab work for is like a gateway test. If we can look at trends from that 10,000-foot view, we might have a better idea of where to spend our time and effort. And we're going to get general information about like what the immune system's up to and how it's functioning. How are our red blood cells, and are we carrying oxygen well? Do we have hints of iron dysregulation? How about blood sugar balance and insulin sensitivity? And if we did a lipid panel too, we'll get some insight into like diet and liver function and inflammation. So there's a lot that we can pull from there. But of course, there's a lot that we can add to that. So what I like to do for our clients, and this is on Instagram too, there's a post that you can just screenshot. It's like an expanded annual physical. And there's probably about a 50% success rate with going to a primary care physician with this list and requesting it. That will be the easiest option. But if you can't get them to order that full list, there are a lot of direct-to-consumer lab companies now where you can actually buy your own lab tests, like Request a Test would be a good example of that. So we like to add things like a fasting insulin to that basic lab work, so we get more insight into blood sugar. Yes. So easy to add, so much more information than just a fasting glucose or even just a glucose and an A1C. We'll want to expand upon the thyroid markers if there were any originally included in that annual physical. I'd like to expand on iron handling and the greater iron recycling system and some of the additional nutrients involved, and then adding things like a red blood cell magnesium, so we get a more meaningful reflection of magnesium status. I like to add vitamin A and of course vitamin D to that. So that's our expanded annual physical lab work that, again, you can request or order it yourself from direct-to-consumer testing companies.
Love that. Wow. So, okay. Somebody goes to their doctor and their doctor it's like, yeah, I'll pull these things. I don't know what they mean. Like, and they get it. Or let's say they go to a direct to consumer lab and they get this information for themselves. What are they going to do with that? What is maybe the advantage of doing this on your own? Because just to kind of make this question not mysterious, I often tell people, if you're going to test, work with someone who can interpret the test.
Yeah.
Because if you're just going to get this information and you don't really know what to do with it, then what are we going to do? I see this a lot. People will get like a Dutch test. They can order it themselves. And I'm like, that's great. But I've had to study and learn a lot to be able to actually do anything with that. And I remember my first time getting a workup from a Dutch test and being like, oh my God, it's like trying to drive a spaceship. Like all these dials and all this stuff. What does this even mean? So if someone goes and gets the answers of lab work, and it's what do they do with that? What do you recommend people do?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. Your lab work is only worth the investment if there's going to be someone helping you interpret this and creating a plan of action from that testing. Otherwise, especially with something like a Dutch test, which I do love, but it's expensive, there's no point in spending the money on it if we don't have a good interpretation coming shortly thereafter.
If there's no potential treatment, yeah.
Right, because what's the point of knowing it if we can't interpret it or make a plan? And that's a really common experience for our clients too. They'll buy a test because they have access to it, but there's been no action afterwards because they didn't have anyone interpret it. So my recommendation would be, if you are embarking on this journey of getting more information through testing to optimize hormone health or fertility, or maybe part of some like preconception planning, do so with the partnership of a practitioner that can interpret this with you and help walk you through it. That's going to be the best use of your time and money, rather than just thinking that the information itself will do anything, because it doesn't mean much on its own.
I also find some people want to jump to the Dutch test. Like maybe 3 years ago, early COVID, it was like everybody was doing Dutch tests, and everybody wants to jump to these like very expensive functional medicine tests. But to your earlier point, like we can get things for much cheaper that are easier to access, that you don't have to mail off, that are good starting points. And I think in my earlier years of online practice, I was a little bit too quick to jump myself in recommending something like a Dutch test, where I work a lot with the PCOS community. If you're not ovulating, usually my goal is to get you ovulating before we try and dig in a whole lot deeper. And so sometimes I want listeners to hear this and hear that it's okay to just start with a serum blood test of certain things. Not just is it okay, it can give us really great data. And you might save yourself a lot of money on another test that, depending on testing or not, might actually not change our intervention recommendation. So always asking the question, like, what are we going to do with this information? Could it potentially change what we are going to do or recommend? Then there might be value in considering that. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on, like, how do you help maybe even practitioners learn to weigh that out, so that a consumer can kind of, like, as they're shopping, practitioners can go like, well, do you run this on just everyone, or are you making individualized recommendations and choices? Because I think testing can get really expensive, that sometimes those resources could be better used by hiring a personal trainer or somebody that would come in and meal prep for you, or some of the more like boots on the ground things that may actually change your day-to-day life.
Oh yeah, that's such a good question. And this is something I'm really passionate about too. And I think it sounds like most of us in the functional nutrition space had the same trajectory, where it was like we got exposed to some really cool functional tests and we were all like just full nerd, like ready to do this with everybody. And, you know, I've never regretted running a test. It's always good information. But the one question that we always filter lab ordering decisions through, and the same way it's taught in my practitioner program, is, will this change my interventions? Because if it doesn't, we don't need to be spending any money on it. And with hormones, you know, we're talking about women's health and fertility, you know, hormones are very much the tip of the iceberg in terms of what's going on and what's actually going to move the needle. And if we haven't looked at the basic stuff, like the boring, unsexy blood work compared to like a really cool Dutch test, there's no point in spending the money on that, because we have so much groundwork to lay. And to your point with the PCOS community or anyone that's not ovulating, why would we spend the money to look at hormones that are dictated by ovulation if we know we're not ovulating yet? Like, we've got so much walking to do before we can run with some of the fancier tests. So I'm a big fan of starting with the basics. It keeps the cost down. It's like a responsible way to work somebody up and know where it makes sense to spend more money. And we can really extract a lot of great information from inexpensive blood work. And another favorite that's really low cost is the HTMA test, the hair tissue mineral analysis. So I think over the years, I've gone from like, let's do it all and be complicated, to let's be as simple and cost effective as possible. And it has been a really nice direction to go.
I've found my practice shifting in that same direction as well. Yeah. And I think that's just part of like maturing as a practitioner also, is you come out guns a-blazing when you're this new dietitian and you are so excited about what you know, and you're so excited that you are different from a general practitioner, that you do have a different skill set, and you just want to save the world and change the world, and you want to be like Dr. House or something, where you like,
Totally.
you know, find this random thing and it's the key to it all and blah, 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 that it becomes so easy to just gloss over the basics. And the more and more I'm working, so I've sort of switched my focus from working with just women who are trying to conceive to optimizing your progesterone and the importance of progesterone, how to get progesterone to actually work within your body, let alone making enough of it. And just really focusing on that, because I see this as sort of the silent fertility epidemic
Yes.
in our country, in our world right now. And so much of it comes down to like just the basics of how to optimize your progesterone, is just the basics. And in looking at people's blood work, the same thing. Like, in order for your progesterone to be good, we maybe don't even need to be testing it all the time to know that it's not good. We can look at these other markers. We can see that your CRP is really high. We can see that your iron markers aren't very good. We can see that your insulin and glucose ratio is not good. And that right there alone tells me you either aren't making enough progesterone or you're not using it well. And that, plain and simple, just from those few labs. And so working on those labs, working on getting your inflammation down, your stress down, working on getting your blood sugar more balanced, that alone is going to have downstream going to really impact your progesterone. And so if we're just zooming in on like, well, is there a blood test for progesterone? I mean, yeah, there is, but it's really not showing the whole story, or even the story that, it's not even the story we need to be reading.
Right.
Sometimes.
Yes, I totally agree. We have a very similar lens, it sounds like, because when we're helping women, regardless if it's trying to conceive now or fix hormone problems or get a period back, you know, it really comes down to making sure they can make enough energy, so like a strong metabolism. And under that umbrella is the thyroid and progesterone and their bidirectional relationship, and that they've got enough nutrients on board to make progesterone to support pregnancy if that's a goal for them. And it's amazing how simple things really get when you zoom out and think about like, what are the few underlying factors that we care about? And if we think about those things, it's pretty simple testing and assessments that we can do to gather that data. I mean, it sounds like we're looking through pretty similar lenses when we're working up clients. I know we serve slightly different client populations, but if we look at the big themes of what we're trying to accomplish with women's health, whether it's for getting a period back or fixing period symptoms or helping someone conceive or troubleshoot infertility, it's, do we have the ability to make energy? Like, is our metabolism strong? And with that is the thyroid and progesterone and their bidirectional relationship. And do we have the nutrients on board to manufacture progesterone and to support pregnancy if that's the goal? And if we think about it being just those simple things, it's really basic lab work and like general assessments that can give us that insight. And then rather than jumping right to this expensive functional testing that is cool and great info, it's like we keep that in our back pocket and use it if needed, but we don't see it as a starting point. And that would be my recommendation. If you're a consumer and you're looking like, I'm just at the start of my journey, I'm not sure where to begin, my advice wouldn't be to jump for like the creme de la creme testing if we haven't looked at the stuff below the surface.
So I have another question about direct-to-consumer labs, but before we go there, we're going to take a break and hear from our sponsors, and then we'll dive into it.
We're taking a quick break from this episode to talk about one of our sponsors, the Prenatal Nutrition Library.
We love the Prenatal Nutrition Library. It's a searchable database and app, which means you have answers within seconds and peace of mind that what you're eating during pregnancy is both safe and nutritious.
It's almost like having your own personal pregnancy dietitian in your back pocket that's going to not only tell you, is it safe to eat this, how much of that should I have, yada, 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 but give you actual meal plans so you know how to put it all together onto your plate today. And the meal plans are trimester specific, meaning, you know, some women are kind of nauseous in their first trimester and maybe they need specific foods to help combat that. Prenatal Nutrition Library has got you covered. Or the fact that your baby's brain is growing rapidly in your third trimester and you need your nutrition to support that. Prenatal Nutrition Library Meal Plans has got you covered there too.
This is evidence-based information. Registered dietitians are in this app weekly answering members' questions. There's an exclusive podcast within the app that's run by Ryan, who is the prenatal dietitian that founded this entire thing. It's a wealth of knowledge and resources and will take you far beyond that one-page handout your doctor handed you that actually probably has out-of-date information about eating in pregnancy.
So head on over to the Prenatal Nutrition Library as soon as you get your big fat positive. Well, okay, first message me and Caitlin so we can do a happy dance with you. Then head over to the Prenatal Nutrition Library to get clear strategies to meet your nutrient needs, as well as to take the stress out of confirming what's safe and most optimal for you and your baby while you're pregnant. Use code FFF20 for 20% off.
So one thing that I do love about the marketplace is when we're struggling with our practitioner relationships to advocate for comprehensive lab panels. Like sometimes you go to the doctor and somebody said like 60% maybe of the time the doctor's like, yeah, I'll do this a little bit more thorough version of an annual assessment. Sometimes that can be really frustrating and it can be really hard to like practitioner shop. And so on one hand, I am very thankful that we have some of these direct to consumer options, but we just talked about the value of working with a practitioner that knows how to interpret it and can help design a plan with you, in concert with you, helping you find the low-hanging fruit, helping you look at the long-term goals, all of those things. But it also opens up a group, the consumer, our audience, everyone on social media, just like average American, especially in a motivated, I'm really struggling with hormone issues, or I'm trying to get pregnant, like a very motivated population, to be very preyed upon. And there are some direct-to-consumer options, very specifically things that you can do from your home with like pricking your finger and putting some blood on a piece of paper and send it off to some labs that I can't remember the name of at the moment. But options that are direct to consumer that I, as a practitioner, would never recommend somebody waste their money on.
For real.
So can we talk a little bit about the changing landscape there, and like for all three of us, what are some red flags, things that I wouldn't necessarily be like, hey, let's do this lab option and send it off and start like running with that information?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I don't know if this is a fair red flag, but it is a red flag for me. If they've got a really robust Instagram marketing campaign, it's probably a no. You know, like if there are the lab tests that are showing up like every other story, or you're getting targeted ads for it, it'll raise suspicions for me. I would be looking closer at that, because I think where we can get into trouble with this is when we're treating a test as if it's applicable to everyone in any scenario, and we're getting like a printout of some kind of a like boilerplate recommendation from it. There's a very big difference between that and like a personalized interpretation and game plan. And I think there's a lot of pros to the change in the landscape. And I think getting like you know, the power back in people's hands to get information is a really good step. We just need discernment and make sure that we're not, you know, doing tests that aren't validated, or we're not getting an actual interpretation. And I think it can be harmful too.
It can be. And Caitlin and I have both seen that firsthand. We've seen results come back from these, you know, more modern modern companies. And we've seen huge discrepancies. We've seen a lab report coming back from this at-home test compared to like fresh blood drawn with an actual lab in a vial, where we're going to see things to be more accurate. And the discrepancy is really big. We're not talking about like, oh, well, this said my vitamin D was 35, and when I did it here, it said it was 40. Like, okay, well, whatever, you know, like there's standard deviations. We're talking about like
vitamin D of 90.
To this,
and then yours came back when I drew it at 24, and one is like the highest end of normal, and the other is deficient, you know?
Yes.
Concerning.
And to the point where, okay, this test is telling you that you're okay, and this at-home test is telling you you're okay, and now we're testing in a lab and we're seeing actually you're really not okay, and this is something that's actually a pathology, and if you were to become pregnant at this moment, your baby could actually be sick because of what we're seeing here. That's a big freaking red flag. That's like a shut down the system red flag. And I totally agree with you, Kaely. I think that I like this trend and I like the way things are going, but I think at this point it would be like getting the Gen 1 iPhone, like the very first one with tons of problems, that's like overloading the satellite and like, no one can send a message or whatever. First generation electric car that can only go 40 miles on a charge or whatever. That is sort of, I see these at-home tests being kind of in their infancy. And I love the concept of it, of being able to just test in your home, have access to an online practitioner, I even like the concept of like doing this sort of like online quiz and having it tell you, here's what you should be looking for because these are your goals. Like that's all so much better than just walking into any lab today or walking into LabCorp and saying, I want you to test my hormones. And they're like, okay, there's like 50 hormones in your body. Some of them are like kidney function. So what do you want me to look for? It's better than just that, but it needs growth. I feel like these companies need to step up their game. Yeah, they're not we're looking at sort of a Theranos situation right now.
Yeah, I know. I had a similar experience with huge discrepancies, and I did it on myself to like guinea pig this home like blood spot thyroid test. And then I did a blood draw that day too. So I was like, we're going to do same day, roughly same time, like two completely different people, basically is how that looked. And I was like, well, we're not going to be using this in practice. And it can be dangerous. You don't want to miss something if something's there. And I think it's got a ways to go. And I often think about like, how do we create a resource where somebody that wants to get their own testing done can like have help interpreting it like in a direct to consumer fashion. And I have not been able to figure that out because there's so much nuance with a human being. And there's value in working with someone that understands that and is working with just you and not creating a resource for the masses. So, I mean, if someone can figure that out, great, but it hasn't been figured out yet.
That's labs 101. Treat the patient, not the labs.
Right.
And I say this in progesterone work all the time. Have women gotten pregnant easily, had healthy pregnancies and healthy babies with progesterone under 25? Yeah, definitely. We see that all the time, but do we see like more complications, more problems when the progesterone was lower than that in a pregnancy? Yes. And so like looking at someone, because doctors always like progesterone doesn't really matter, like it changes so much. And that is true. And while people can have lab values that look like this or that, and still be healthy and have things looking fine and feeling good and whatever, if you're not feeling good, if you're not getting pregnant, if you're not keeping pregnancies, if you are having pain, irregular periods, lack of ovulation, blah, 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 blah. If you are having symptoms, then what might be normal, or maybe suboptimal, but it's not really impacting Jennifer down the street, but here you are with the same level and you're having symptoms, then for you, we need to treat this. That's why we can't just take everyone's lab work and make blanket statements across the board about, okay, well, if your vitamin D is less than this, here's what you need to do. It doesn't work like that in an individual. There, like you said, there is nuance, and we need to treat you, not the lab work. The lab work is a tool to treat you, to help you. It's not all about labs. They're not the end all be all. You, your body, your symptoms. That's the end all be all.
Amen. Really, really well said.
Was it succinct?
So succinct.
No, not really. It was a little.
I thought it was. I thought it was. I was impressed.
Kaely's the queen of succinct.
I was aggressively nodding.
The queen.
I'm a little more verbose, or a lot more verbose.
She paints the journey. She brings the spice. Kaely, I'm
thinking and talking at the same time.
When you think about labs, Kaely, and you think about let's give her a name. Sharon, not Karen, Sharon. Sharon walks in. She has CBC, CMP, lipid panel, an A1C, just like some basics from her doctor. She's wanting to get pregnant. She's not sure if she has issues. She thinks she's ovulating. What would you do in terms of blood panels before you would move on to anything else? Because a normal physician isn't screening for hormone issues.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would for sure make sure we're getting a look at her thyroid in its entirety, especially because she's looking to conceive. I mean, I would consider that foundational whether you want to conceive or not, because that is how we make energy and has such a big connection to progesterone. And like you, Sophia, I'm like deeply passionate about progesterone and think we're like a generation robbed of it for various reasons. But anywho, I would make sure we got a full thyroid panel and then a bigger iron assessment. So looking at not just iron, but some of the transport proteins and a couple other nutrients that are part of that picture. Because in the context of hormone health and fertility, I want to make sure we don't have a sluggish metabolism or energy shortage in the body, and that we don't have a lot of inflammation or nutrient deficiencies present. So that's always our next move beyond just like your annual physical. And then I would want to see an HTMA, which is, a whole different ballpark, but still really cost effective, so easy to do.
That's the hair tissue mineral analysis.
Just good
Do
mineral
that.
info.
I've never done that.
Oh my gosh.
I'm going to do it on my husband. My God,
You should.
what will we find? All right, hold on just a second. We're going to hear from our sponsor, and we will be right back.
Hey guys, we're taking a break from our episode, and I want to talk about something that's super confusing. When you head down the supplement aisle and you're looking for a prenatal, and on the prenatal bottle itself, it says, do not take if you're trying to conceive, pregnant, or breastfeeding. Like, what the heck?
Yeah, it says, talk to your doctor if you are pregnant, could be pregnant, breastfeeding, postpartum, whatever. And every supplement has this. You go down the supplement aisle, you go shopping on whatever supplement website, and there's a disclaimer on every bottle of every single thing, which means that everything that you've been taking your whole life long is now a big question mark about whether or not you are potentially harming yourself by taking something where you're trying to be healthy. So that is why we partnered with Needed. Needed is a perinatal nutrition supplement brand that has a wide array of products specifically designed for women who are pregnant, trying to become pregnant, breastfeeding, or postpartum. So it's not just that these products like can work if you're in that situation, or oh, it's probably okay if you take it while you're trying to conceive. No. These products are researched, they are formulated, and they are put together specifically for women who are trying to conceive, pregnant, breastfeeding, and postpartum.
This answers so many questions. I always get asked, like, what can I take? It's cold and flu season. What's safe? Needed has an immune support. That's safe whether you're trying to conceive, pregnant. It's even safe for your little ones.
And it's not just immune support. They've got collagen. They've got hydration support. They have digestive support. They have prenatal multi. They even made a line for dudes.
Needed is somebody we're really proud to be partnering with. So head over to their website and use code FFF20 for 20% off your order.
All right, we're back.
We're back. Okay, so we're talking about all these functional medicine tests, which is funny because most of them are at-home tests. But we were talking about things like Modern Fertility or Everlywell or these other ones where you like prick your finger, put a little blood on a piece of paper, send it off. How is that different from an HTMA, a Dutch test, a stool test, or any other type of functional medicine test you recommend or have educated practitioners on?
Yeah, so what I would recommend if you're looking at options is learn more about that lab company. So what I'm looking for if I'm going to order something for a client or want to be affiliated with them in any way as a practitioner is that they are CLIA certified, meaning that they've got third parties coming in to make sure that their testing procedures produce reliable and accurate data. And they'll do like repeat samples. So they'll take the same person's collection and they'll run it through twice to make sure that this is spitting out reliably similar information each time. So with the HTMA company that we use, Trace Elements, we looked for that CLIA certification. We wanted to make sure they do those split test samples. They do them once every 24 hours. And they routinely participate in like QA measures, quality assurance measures. Same thing for Dutch, same thing for GI Map through Diagnostic Solutions. So it's about knowing more about the company itself. It's all still a bit of a gray area in the functional testing direct-to-consumer realm, because this isn't like a LabCorp or a Quest. It's like a national known, like years of data type presence. So I would go to the website and I would learn about their practices, who's checking in on this, making sure it's not just the lab company that's certifying that they have accurate results, that we have other third parties coming in to verify. And then it's something that I'll use and guinea pig my husband. I'll guinea pig like friends and family, guinea pig myself.
God, I want to guinea pig my husband so badly. I am going to do that.
It's a really good way to,
He's going to get
exposed
stool
to it.
test,
Yes.
pee-pee,
all
hair.
the specimen.
We already made him check his sperm. We're good on that.
There we go. Yeah, you just gotta guinea pig it up a little bit with that stuff to make sure that it's something you want to incorporate in practice. And then if you're on the consumer side of things and not a provider, it's reading about that lab company and making sure that they're reputable and it's not some company that just started this month that has no data behind it.
So talk to me about each of the three that you just mentioned. A hair mineral tissue analysis, or HTMA, say those words differently. A GI or a stool test, and then a Dutch test. We've talked about all of these before at one point or another, or referenced them, but like, what does receiving the kit look like to sending it off and getting results? Let's start with hair tissue mineral analysis. What does that look like? And how does somebody, like, I hear that and I'm like, okay, you want my hair. Look how long my hair is. So what do you want me to do here?
So HTMA is a hair sample, and we want to get the hair closest to the scalp because that's going to be the most recent data. So when you receive an HTMA kit, it comes in an envelope in the mail. There's instructions in there, and then there's this little paper scale. That is how we determine if we have enough sample. So you're cutting from a few places. A few small sections is my recommendation versus one large for obvious reasons. We're cutting close to the scalp, and then we're taking just the 1.5 inches that's closest to the scalp, adding that to the paper scale until it tips, and then we know we have enough of a sample. It's about a heaping teaspoon of hair in total. Pro tip, don't do this on your own. Have somebody do this for you. I tried to DIY my hair sample and cut like a massive chunk of hair by accident, and we still have an awkward scenario back there. So just have someone that can see it, do a couple small samples, and then that goes off to the lab. The slowest part for HTMA testing is the mail, because it's just regular mail. Once they get it, it only takes a couple of business days for them to do the test, and then your practitioner will get the results electronically in a PDF, and you'll go over it, or you can get a hard copy in the mail too. So pretty easy, straightforward for HTMAs. For Dutch tests, which I know you guys have talked about before, that's a pretty involved collection experience. I'm assuming you guys have done Dutch tests too. Yeah. So Dutch stands for dried urine testing for comprehensive hormones. So we're peeing on a bunch of strips of paper. You're potentially also collecting saliva samples depending on which panel you ordered. And you're doing this over a 24-hour period of time. And it's one of the coolest things about the test, because when we do blood work for hormones, we get one moment in time versus an entire 24-hour rhythm and looking at how things are broken down and excreted. But when you do a Dutch collection, the kit comes in the mail as well. You're collecting urine and possibly saliva samples at predetermined periods of time. You're letting those urine strips dry in the bathroom, which is super fun for like a day. And then that gets repackaged in the kit and goes off to the lab.
So
yeah,
there's a couple different levels of Dutch testing. And can you talk a little bit about why you might recommend for somebody to just do kind of the more basic plus maybe like the cortisol stuff versus like a cycle mapping?
Yeah, so there's a Dutch complete, a Dutch plus, and then a Dutch cycle mapping. And the Dutch Plus is what we recommend if we're going to do a Dutch test on our clients, like probably 99% of the time, because that combines the urine collection, their like standard Dutch panel, with saliva collection to give us a little bit more insight into the health of their adrenals and their circadian rhythm. So the saliva collection gives us what's called a cortisol awakening response, or a mini stress test. And when we're working with clients on hormones and fertility, usually stress and circadian rhythm is part of what got them into that hormone pickle to begin with. So we love that info. The cycle mapping is a really interesting test, and you'll actually collect urine strips through an entire month-long cycle. And it is a huge pain to do this, I will say. So we don't recommend it often because it's just a very involved, long, drawn-out period. But you do get information about every single day of the cycle. You'll see your estrogen and progesterone curves, and they're able to find your true progesterone peak from that data and run the rest of the Dutch panel on the actual correct day. So if we had somebody who we had a hard time pinpointing if and when they were ovulating and we couldn't time the Dutch collection well, that would be a good fit for them. And then also someone that's been trying to conceive for a long time, and maybe all signs point toward they shouldn't be having problems with this, but we're thinking maybe we aren't identifying ovulation correctly. The cycle mapping would be a good option there.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, a cycle mapping option, we're talking into many multiples of hundreds of dollars here, like over $500. I think I haven't run it in the last 6 months, so I'm not sure if they've increased it or not. But, when we're talking about that, I will often, and I'm just inserting this here in kind of the fertility journey, before I'm going to go spend $500 to $700 on a Dutch cycle mapping, I want to know, are your tubes open?
Yeah.
I want to know, does your partner have sperm that's moving in enough concentration? And so those can be less expensive. One is not less invasive. Collecting your urine, collecting your saliva, like throwing a little cotton swab in your mouth for a few minutes and then collecting your saliva is less invasive than getting like a HSG, where they're injecting dye into your uterus and we're seeing if your ovaries are open and patent. But if we know, we have a general idea of when you're ovulating, we know you've timed sex well for a while, we need to cross off those other two boxes of like, what's the sperm doing? Is it there? Is there enough? Does it move? Does it have is 2 heads, 1 tail, 2 tails, 1 head? Like, what's going on there? And can an egg and a sperm meet? Like, are your tubes open and patent? Those are kind of some basic things that I think knowing when to insert that into your journey can be kind of helpful. And I'm of the opinion that being proactive, usually people are looking for a Kaely or a Caitlin or a Sophia when things haven't gone well. Oftentimes they're finding us way too late in that process where they've already invested tens of thousands of dollars in reproductive technologies, even done IVF, maybe had IVF fail them. And now they're looking at some of these more root cause, like as if this is the Hail Mary throw down the field.
Yeah.
When all of these things, you may still have a partner that has 2 sperm in a sample. And they're going to take those 2 sperm and do IVF with you. We can have a much better chance at IVF if we can optimize these foundational pillars of health. And it's interesting thinking about something like the Dutch test, where it is expensive, but it can be very enlightening. I love what you just said about the cortisol awakening response and hormones, and how much our female hormones are related to how we interact with our environment and nature, and having a strong circadian rhythm and connection with the earth and the moon and the sun and all these things that have dictated female hormones for millennia. And we are so disconnected from physically, environmentally, like we're as just a race right now in a first world country that is very integrated lifestyle wise with technologies and stuff. We're just very dysregulated from the earth and how it impacts our health. And on one hand, I'm like, I love seeing this cortisol awakening response data, because usually it isn't changing what I'm going to do, but it helps me get my patient to buy into the less sexy, super basic thing of like, you got to cut those blue screens out, sister. I need you to go get sunlight early in the day in your eyeballs and on your skin. Like these things that are like, oh, come on, just give me the supplement or tell me the miracle food to eat, or like these are the miracle things that our ancestors have been doing and didn't even know they were doing, because they were connected to the earth's rhythms in a way that we aren't really anymore unless we're being super intentional about it. And it is, I'm just bringing it up because it's almost like this very interesting you and I are looking through the lens of what are we going to do with this information and how will it shape our intervention. But a lot of times what you and I do are helping our clients see the importance of the intervention and the value in committing to it.
Love that tool for that reason. And I think it helps you understand yourself better when you can see how this plays out in lab results. And it's one of my favorite things about doing a lab interpretation is that moment when someone who's been like spinning their wheels for a long time, or maybe they've been told for years that everything's normal and they just don't feel like themselves. And then they finally see a glimpse of what that has been caused by, or some validation for symptoms, and an understanding of how their diet and lifestyle and the way that they do or don't engage with nature is impacting their physiology. So it's such a powerful teaching tool, and just like understanding yourself. And it's probably my favorite aspect of it, above and beyond even the info that we get.
It is quite remarkable. Okay, let's move on from Dutch. What about something like a stool test? You mentioned the GI map.
Oh, yeah.
What does that look like in terms of receiving a package, shipping it off? This is one that most people are not as excited about doing. I don't know why urine and saliva and hair is more appealing than poop. Maybe I do know why, but let's talk about it.
Yeah. Yeah. So we'll use a functional stool test in practice if we've got a client that has really widespread nutrient deficiencies despite good intake. So we're looking at, is there an absorption issue? If they've got, of course, a lot of GI symptoms that have been chronic, a lot of inflammation. We see a lot of gut microbiome issues with things like endometriosis and more inflammatory conditions. So we'll use a stool test in those times. Now, if you receive a GI map stool test, it's coming in a box. It's getting delivered to the door. There's great instructions in there, but like you mentioned, this isn't going to be like the most fun thing you've ever done in your afternoon. But you're going to have a bowel movement onto a collection tray, and then there's like a little collection vial.
It looks like a fry container.
Yes, an In-N-Out French fry tray.
Food. Yes, yeah, that's exact. So, I mean, hopefully it's more sterile than the one you ate French fries off of, but this is not like fancy. It's like a paper poop grabber.
Literally just something to hold the poop out of the toilet so that you can take a few little samples from a few areas on that stool. And then that goes into a test vial with the testing medium, and then it goes into the fridge until you put it back in a prepaid FedEx label. One thing that I always find soothing to tell people is that the FedEx label does not say, like in large words, poop sample on the outside or anything like that. So when you drop this off at FedEx, no one else knows what's in there except for you. But it's easy in the sense that you're doing this from your home. You've got a prepaid FedEx bag. No one knows what's in it. The only thing that might slow you down is you just obviously have to have a bowel movement to collect the sample. So you might be waiting a day for that. But then that goes in the mail, and results are delivered electronically to your practitioner as well. And they'll give you insight into, the beneficial or good bacteria in the gut, some opportunistic bacteria, pathogens, and digestive capacity.
Yeah, I think that this is the type of test, if we could get every gastroenterologist in America to buy into functional stool testing, we could see so much improvement in everyday life of many Americans.
I know.
Because it can be really powerful. I think we've really underestimated as a society, with so many like modern conveniences like water treatment centers and stuff, the fact that we could still have exposure to parasites or other opportunistic things in our GI tract that live very happily for a long time, creating issues downstream without us really knowing about it.
Yep. Yeah. Totally agree. And I actually really like a GI map test even earlier than a Dutch test in a lot of cases, because if we're thinking, root cause intervention, it doesn't get much more root cause than the health and function of your gut, because it doesn't matter how beautiful your nutrition or how immaculate your supplement protocol is if we can't absorb it. So it's a really useful tool.
Absolutely. Okay, so here's one you didn't mention. And you and I have never really talked about this or much in general other than on this podcast. So this is me throwing a curveball at you.
Yeah.
Swing if you want. Don't if you don't want to. But this is something that I think is really controversial, also gaining popularity in at-home testing, and it's the idea of food sensitivity testing.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on that? And what do you recommend? When do you recommend? Do you not recommend?
Yeah. I have a lot of thoughts on
You
this.
ready? Winding up.
I'm ready. It's great. I knew this was going to be the question, because we have to mention it. This is the one that has like the best social media marketing right now. And in general, I'm not a fan of food sensitivity tests, at least not the IgG food sensitivity tests that are the direct to consumer ones.
So what is the IgG? So people who don't have our background, what's IgG stand for?
So this is a type of food sensitivity testing measuring whether or not your immune system created an antibody against the food that it was exposed to. Now, the problem with IgG testing is that we can get a lot of false positives and false negatives with this style. So what commonly happens is someone will buy this test, they'll do it, they'll get the report, and they're like, oh my God, I'm sensitive to everything that I always eat.
I ate almonds. I ate my favorite fruit's cantaloupe. And like, of course, almonds and cantaloupe are at the top of the list.
Right. Because if we look at the way the immune system works, when we eat a food, that IgG production doesn't necessarily equate to inflammation. It just means the immune system saw it because you ate it. So we're going to see basically a list of things that you eat commonly. Is it possible that one of those things was causing an inflammatory reaction? Maybe. So when clients pull some foods out and feel better, it's usually because we happen to catch one of those in the mix. But we get so many false positives that we end up with a list of like 3 safe foods to eat. So we see a lot of clients that have been hanging out with like a 5 to 10 food list for years on end and scared to bring food back in. And that's a real problem for microbiome diversity and just overall health. So we don't love IgG testing for that reason. Don't find it clinically useful.
And mental health. And social health, and just like all the health. And also how many of us have restrictive or disordered eating patterns in the past that getting these very defined food rules, like you feel like it brings you safety. You're actually in a prison, and now you're so convinced that this food is fucking you up that when you do eat it, you're having a visceral, bodily reaction to it. Maybe not necessarily because of the food itself, but because of this mental energy you've had around this food for so long.
I totally agree. And, our question is always, what's driving this? In my professional opinion, is that a food sensitivity isn't the root of the issue. A food sensitivity, which can absolutely happen, they can be real, is indicative of issues in the gut, whether we're got a microbiome imbalance or the lining is too small and we're having just inappropriate immune responses to food. So rather than chasing elimination diets with food, I'd rather look at what's going on in the gut and support it from there so we can improve oral tolerance and eat like a normal person without stress around food.
Yeah, and how freeing can that be to, again, look at the root of the problem and have variety and foods available to you that you love instead of feeling like you have to avoid them. And I think just hearing you speak about this a lot, we agree. And I think that this is a really safe stance to be, is that food sensitivities will usually resolve when gut health resolves and the immune system calms down. So if we can focus on health and healing, the actual problem, versus what our brains want, which is just black and white rules. It's really nice to be told, like, take this medication or don't eat apples. But like, what if you actually have to work on stress management, sleep quality, focus on specific bitter foods and replace digestive enzymes because they took your gallbladder out, and like do this type of work, which isn't as sexy or as fun as saying, I'm just gluten-free, dairy-free for the rest of my life and I can't eat nightshades. And you've got this like very complicated regimen that is unsustainable and not enjoyable long term. I would like to layer infertility on top of that. And you can live in a very scary prison where then you finally do achieve pregnancy and you're afraid of everything because you think your body's so overreactive to it that if you eat the banana you're craving instead of the chicken that helped you get pregnant, you might harm your baby. So it may seem like, oh, Kaely and Caitlin, they just don't want us to buy this really nice Everlywell food sensitivity test or whatever other test is out there, and they want us to pay them money and have them do a more expensive. No, that's not what's happening here. No. We're trying to help save you from something that we've seen clients go through, generations go through, and also what Kaely just said, food sensitivities, we need to deal with the gut, because whether you have a food sensitivity or not, if you're not getting enough B vitamins from your food, or you're not getting enough choline from your food, or you're not getting enough, if you're not absorbing the nutrition, it really doesn't matter what prenatal you're taking or any of these other things that you could spend a lot of money and throw it at if you're not actually willing to make the changes.
Yep, always pointing toward the less sexy lifestyle interventions,
right?
But it's just what moves the needle. And it sounds like all three of us have had this evolution in practice from more complex to simple, from like kind of tip of the iceberg to just the foundations, and just helping people get back to being like a real human, spending some time outside, not being on blue lights anymore, and not expecting our digestive tract to extract nutrients beautifully if we're in fight or flight mode all the time. So it's a lot of very simple things that we have to work on that are not as fun. No, they're not.
No, they're not.
You won't find like a nice headline from any of that.
No, you won't. And but I do feel like there is a headline to this episode, and it's not what I'm about to quote from you earlier, but hearing you say we are an entire generation robbed of progesterone, like gave me goosebumps in a bad way. Because it's so true, and it's going to affect mental health, sleep health, bone health, breastfeeding health. Like, it's going to affect so many different things that we don't realize because we've just been told to shut down our hormones for so long. And I think that maybe what I'm indirectly speaking of, and you have some nice sound bites out about recently, is maybe a little bit of like a canary in the coal mine of like, you probably need some of these tests if you lived a lot of your life on hormonal contraceptives, because it fucked you up in ways you don't really realize. Maybe we could just like have a short aside about that, why hair mineral analysis testing or fight or flight and cortisol testing could be tied to living 2 years or 12 years on hormonal contraceptives.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought this up because it's a big passion area of mine and a part of my story and entry point into this work anyways. But essentially, if we are on hormonal birth control, we are suppressing ovulation and our own hormone production. And so we're not benefiting from the beautiful things that progesterone does for us. We're also being provided synthetic hormones that have their own unique and most often harmful action. So what we know from the research is that there's significant nutrient depletion, things like B vitamins, a lot of really important minerals, things like magnesium, and how involved that is with how we handle stress and engage with our environment. We know that it changes the nature of the gut microbiome to favor more gram-negative bacteria that can be more inflammatory and can actually keep estrogen levels high for us. And then we also know that it impacts the brain and our neurotransmitter production and how we feel and interact with others and our environment too. So if we've spent a good chunk of our life, a few years or a few decades, with chemical suppression of our hormone production, we've got some cleaning up to do by way of nutrients, by way of metabolism, by way of gut health. And I think that testing is even more applicable in that case because we can't guess.
Yeah. That was just your like commercial spot for your TEDx interview, I expect, in the next couple of years.
I would love to do that.
And you are so succinct and so good at communicating complicated points. Like, I hope,
Thank you.
And I would like to attend live if that ends up being your reality. I will be your biggest girl fan.
I appreciate that so much.
So we don't love immunoglobulin IgG food sensitivity testing. What is the alternative if somebody were to march down this road and want to know a little bit more?
Yeah, so there's one that I could recommend if we really wanted to see how we were reacting to foods. And we used to use it in practice several years ago, and it's been years since I have because it just doesn't fit the clientele that we serve. But the MRT test, mediator release testing, is a pretty unique way of assessing food reactions that minimizes the false positives that we get from IgG tests alone. So rather than looking at an immunoglobulin produced saying we saw the food, the mediator release test is looking at, were inflammatory compounds actually released in response to this food? And for those that are navigating a lot of GI issues, a lot of skin issues, and have like known food reactions, it can sometimes be helpful to have that information in addition to working on the gut health stuff that we talked about, so that we can keep symptoms down while we work on the root cause. Where I don't find it helpful is just doing the food stuff alone, because then we just keep chasing our tail with that.
Right.
But that paired with the foundational stuff that we've discussed already can really be helpful. Mm-hmm. And that's like a very polarizing test and topic in the RD world for some reason.
For sure. Yeah. I am approved to do it and have done it, but I can tell you, I can't even think of the last patient I've done it on, because my approach has similarly been repair the gut, pay attention to how you feel after you're eating foods. And then over time, these things improve when we've worked on the foundational matters. Yeah. So I can't think of any other like pointed, I want to know this, I feel like the consumer really wants to know this about tests. Is there anything else that you would really recommend to somebody who's listening to this that's struggling with infertility in terms of navigating testing, finding a practitioner, or even just like feeling hopeful about getting information from these tests? And you could even maybe share like a case study if you wanted to, give your client a different name and tell us a little bit about success with getting results and making directed changes.
For sure. Yeah. And I think, I would love to reiterate that I'm not trying to create overwhelm where there already is overwhelm if you're stuck on a health journey right now. I'm hoping that this information landed in a hopeful matter, that there's actually different things that can be looked at. A lot of them are really simple, and they might even be things that you already have. We can just look at it a little bit closer in your lab work to help explain things. Because if you don't feel like yourself, and if you're struggling with fertility, even if you've been told your testing looks good, there's something going on there, and that can be found out and worked on. So I'm hoping that brought some hope. And if you are looking for a practitioner to partner with, what I'd be wanting to make sure is that they did do some testing, that they weren't basing their recommendations off of what they recommend for everybody else, and that the plan of action is going to be centered around me as an individual, and that someone's going to walk through it with me. I'm not interested in programs that run all the same tests on everybody and has the same protocol for everybody. I would want to know that it was specific to me. And there are lots of great practitioners out here that practice that way now, which is amazing. And one, client example that I can share is I had a client coming to me for hypothyroidism and infertility, and already diagnosed with hypothyroidism, already on thyroid medication. And this happened after her firstborn, which is a common window of time when we might discover hypothyroidism. There's just so much nutrient depletion and immune shifts and just life changes in that season. And she just felt like she couldn't get out of bed anymore.
Lack of sleep.
Like, yes. Yeah.
Fight or flight. You
everything.
Have this thing crying at you all the time. I mean, there's just so much that happens.
Oh my gosh.
Good or
so
bad.
Much.
Yeah.
So it can oftentimes take a little while to figure out, like, is the way that I'm feeling just part of this season, or is something wrong? So she ended up getting some lab work done with her doctor, found hypothyroidism, started on Synthroid, and she was like, great, I'm going to feel amazing and move forward with my life. And unfortunately, as is the case for a lot of our clients, really didn't have much, if any, symptom improvement, was still feeling like she couldn't show up for her family the way that she wanted to, was dealing with a lot of hair loss, and they wanted to grow their family with an additional child. And she was tracking her basal body temperatures and just showing like what we would gauge to be really poor progesterone production, poor thyroid function. So the first thing we did was some blood work, and we wanted to get a bigger picture of what was going on with the thyroid. So like we talked about in the beginning, if you're lucky, it'll be TSH and T4. That's part of your annual physical, but we want to see T3, which is the active thyroid hormone. We want to rule out an autoimmune situation by looking at thyroid antibodies. We want to look at something called reverse T3 to tell us if there's a stress deactivation picture. And we also looked at an HTMA for her, a hair tissue mineral analysis. And so when we combine a full blood thyroid panel with an HTMA, we get insight into thyroid production, thyroid hormone conversion, and cellular uptake. That's where the HTMA comes in. And what we saw in her labs is that everything looked pretty good on paper. So that's where her endocrinologist was happy with the dose. Everything looks good, but she's like, my hair's falling out. I'm dragging ass throughout the day. But when we looked at her HTMA, there's a thyroid ratio on that test that compares calcium to potassium. And when we have calcium in excess to potassium in the tissues, it can actually block T3 entry into the cell. And she was off the charts. It's actually something called a calcium shell pattern that you see with HTMAs. And so we knew, she's taking medication, it's correcting production and conversion, but she can't get this into her cells. So we worked on a lot of mineral stuff. We also found just a lot of depletion, which is common in postpartum mamas, especially if you also breastfed. Worked on that, helped move calcium out of the tissues back to the bones and teeth. And we watched her basal body temperatures rise like in real time as we're working on that, which is so fun. And of course, symptom resolution and return of fertility was the driving factor for it, but really simple interventions and really working on the mineral piece.
So cool. I think one thing, just to go back to your point of like, I hope this isn't overwhelming where you might already feel overwhelmed. And I don't know Kaely well, but I respect her and I'm sure I can guess that she practices similarly. Like when I'm looking at someone, I call it a personal baseline. That is a moving thing. It changes over time what your baseline is right now. And we're looking at more than just lab work. So you might hear this and go, I don't have a budget for any of this. We're looking at your symptoms. We're looking at your cycle. So what she just said about her basal body temperature changing in real time, that is data your body can give you every single day. Multiple
for
times
free.
a day. Yeah. Like you can look at your basal body temp, your cervical mucus, like you pay $10 for a BBT thermometer and you are off and running. So if you're listening to this, you feel a little overwhelmed, tracking your food for a few days and just looking like, do I have huge buckets of micronutrients that I never even get close to filling? Do I never get enough B9, B12, calcium? Vitamin E is a really common one to not get enough of in our modern American diet. Do my symptoms tell something? What is my cycle telling me? Do I never ovulate? Do I not make cervical mucus? If you don't ovulate and you're not making cervical mucus, like you're probably not making enough estrogen to make the cervical mucus, but you're also not ovulating, so you're not making enough progesterone. So we can see so much when you work with a qualified practitioner and help you see how your body is telling the story of what's going on, and that lab work is a component of that. We look at symptoms. We look at nourishment. We look at your gut symptoms specifically. We'll look at your lifestyle. And, if you heard anything today, focusing on your circadian rhythm will help a lot of these other things trickling downstream. And that's something you can work on tonight with improving your sleep hygiene and blue light exposure and doing some deep breathing and journaling and stretching before bed. Like pick something in that list and try it out tonight. So I just can't thank you enough for your time. I would like to take a break real quick for our last sponsor, and then I want you to tell us all about how people can reach you, take advantage of working with you and your team, or if they're a practitioner listening to this, what you have available for them. And then we have a segment called Yeah Girl, and I'll explain that to you when we come back.
Okay, cool.
We're taking a break to talk about our sponsor, Fertility Cloud. In working with hundreds of you ladies, we have noticed a problem that has come up. I know it's come up for me, Caitlin. It's come up for your clients as well. And that is not only finding a doctor who is going to know how to help you, but one that wants to. We have a lot of issues here, and sometimes getting a simple blood test or actually getting a medication or talking to someone who's actually an expert infertility can not only take an insane amount of time, but it can feel like you're fighting your doctor.
Yeah, or you're playing like Russian roulette to get in front of somebody who actually cares. We are so excited to be partnering with Fertility Cloud because they have a solution for all of these frustrations. Just last week, I had a client that needed right now care, and we couldn't get her in front of an OB. And she got a same-day appointment with Fertility Cloud and spoke to a reproductive endocrinologist and had a prescription that she needed in her hand hours later. This is a solution that our industry desperately needs, and we are so excited to present to you.
So if you're in a remote area and you have to drive 4 hours to go see a doctor, or if you've been to multiple doctors and none of them seem to really listen or really care or want to take an approach that works for you, start up with My Fertility Cloud.
My Fertility Cloud has provided us a link, so check it out in the show notes. That will get you $25 off your first visit with one of their providers. All right. So Kaely, tell us where people can find you, like online. Do you have social channels? What does your programming look like if they hear all this and they're like, I love the way Kaely talks and I want to work with her or the people she trains and has on her team?
Cool. Yeah, you can find me on Instagram. That's where we do most of the free educating. It's at Kaely RD. My name is spelled a little weird. It's Kaely RD. And my website is the same. So you'll find a lot of free educational resources on the website and on Instagram. That's where I'm usually hanging out between client calls. And you'll find information about our one-on-one client offerings. And the way that we operate is we're a small team of 4 women's health dietitians, and we take a collaborative care approach to clients, which means you interface with all 4 of us at different times, and we round on your behalf every week. I'm just such a fan of like a team approach and multiple brains being better than one. And the typical clients that we serve have worked with other practitioners or been around the merry-go-round of expensive testing that didn't get them anywhere. So we like to make sure that it can be the last stop and things don't get missed. So you'll find information for that and an application. We'll have a free call to make sure that it's in our wheelhouse before we move forward. And if it isn't, I'll point you in the direction of some great and talented colleagues too. We're working on a course that should be out here soon, which takes our approach into a like DIY self-paced format. So I'm excited about that. And then on the practitioner side of things, I run a program called Leveraging Labs, usually twice a year. And it's a small group mentorship container, learning how to effectively implement lab testing in practice. And as you probably gathered from this interview, it's not run tests and print out protocols. It's the nuance, it's the decisions on what tests make sense and in what order, and then always remembering that you're treating the person, not their test results, and it's just a tool in your toolkit. So you can find all of that there.
That's so cool. I wish you'd been around when I started. I feel like you could have saved me a lot of headache.
Oh,
and
gosh.
isn't that
we
what
were
it
all
is?
in there learning,
right?
on
Isn't
our
that
own.
what it is? Where it's like, you know, you make the resource because nobody made it for you, and so here you are.
Yes.
You're so cool.
Yep.
I love seeing you. I wished last year when you put on the retreat that you did that I had the freedom to come. So I hope if you ever do that again, I will be on the list to know. Because I'd love to just come hang out with you. And in the spirit of hanging out, this last segment on our podcast is where we celebrate something. And this can give people a view into like behind the scenes of your life. You can celebrate a client win. You can celebrate a business win. You can celebrate a recipe you made last night that you love and it was so great. I'll go first so you can get a feel for what Yeah Girl is. The point of it is for at the end of us, especially at the end of this segment, we both feel like Yeah Girl, like we're encouraging one another and that others just get a view into day-to-day life. So my Yeah Girl, and I'm going to do one for Sophia too, because she had to leave. By the way, if you watch this on video, you realize there's not a third head right now. If you're listening online, Sophia popped out and she's gone for today. So I'm going to give her Yeah Girl. So my Yeah Girl is that we got 2 kittens earlier this year. I'm not a cat person, but I gave in to much child pressure, and we have 2 outdoor kittens. They sleep in our garage and we let them out in the morning. We put them in at night. And it's been like, you're in Texas, Kaely, right? Are you in Texas?
Yep.
So I'm not in Texas, but it's been like 108, 112 degrees in Kansas.
Same.
For the last week, solid. I mean, we've been in the high 90s and low 100s, but it's been like record crazy high. Yeah. And so overnight I was like, hey, I kind of feel like we need to like leave the garage open a little bit. And if the kittens need to leave or, you know, just move around, it's like an oven even in the garage. Well, the first night we ever did that, we woke up and one of the kittens was gone, and it's my 4-year-old's kitten. And I was like, oh no, Bonnie's kitten got eaten last night. Like it was very obvious because they are always within an inch of each other, these two sister kittens we got. And the one that was still around was like not okay because the other one was gone. Yeah. So it was like 8 hours. Here's the spoiler alert. Mittens is back. She was gone.
Thank God. I was like, don't do this to me.
I know. So she was gone, and I was writing my husband's aunt, whose barn cat had the kittens. Like, do you have one that looks just like Mittens? Like, what are we going to do? Worst case scenario. How are we going to break this to my daughter? And my husband hopped on. We moved 3 months ago. So we're in a new neighborhood. Got on the new Nextdoor app. We're like texting all the neighbors that we know if you see Mittens. Well, on this app that we don't even have from Ring phone or Ring front door, somebody posted a picture of a kitten, and it was Mittens, and they were like 2 streets over, and they drove the little golf cart over to her house and returned her. Well, she had a little bite on one of her paws. So what I think happened was she did encounter something overnight. Has a little bit of like a blood bite, you know, like a little scab and blood on one of her back paws, was limping a little bit. I think she got chased and she got like maybe nipped at and got away from whatever that was, fox or owl or I don't know. And then didn't know how to get back. So moral of the story, we're shutting the garage. My daughter still has her kitten. And then my next door neighbor who helped us connect with the person that had her gave me air tags to put on our kittens. So that nice. If that happens again and someone finds her, like, and the other thing is that I made these like beautiful tags that are like, my name's Mittens. I'm an outdoor cat. Call my mommy at, and this is my address. So like if somebody finds her next door, they're going to know she's our outdoor cat and they don't need to call us. But if they find her, you know, whatever. Anyway, I had those, got them, had foresight for this, put them on the collars. And the collars never made it back on the kittens. So now they have their collar, their tag, and an air tag. And Bonnie is in receipt of her very cute 4-month-old kitten that is growing on me, even though I'm not a cat person. Yeah. And like all of us came out of fight or flight mid-Saturday when she showed back up.
Oh my gosh, I'm relieved for you. That's great.
Yeah, girl. Mittens is back.
Girl. Mittens lives on. Thank goodness.
For at least a little while longer. And her leg is healing. So that's yay.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
What do you want to celebrate, Kaely? Other than this episode actually happening.
Yeah, that's a true celebration. Oh, I know what I'll celebrate. So this is my 2nd year of attempting to garden, and I'm in Texas, like you mentioned, and it's also been like 1,000,000 degrees here for months. So year 1, epic fail. Year 2, mostly an epic fail, but I harvested my first tomato today.
Amazing.
And this late in the season is kind of unusual with how hot it's been, but
what are you going to do with it? Did you already eat it? Or are you going to turn it in?
Yeah. We ate it at breakfast.
Awesome.
It was like
salt
this
on
big. It was tiny. Yeah.
I have an uncle that lives down the road, my husband's uncle, and he has had like the most, well, first of all, yeah, girl. I'm proud of you for even trying.
Thank you.
The struggle is real in my black thumb world. But this uncle lives down the street and he has had the most beautiful, like bright red all the way through, juiciest heirloom, just beautiful tomatoes. So we have had a late summer of like caprese salads and cucumber tomato feta salads. And it's been, I'm like, once fall really hits and his tomato production goes down, I'm going to be really sad. Like,
yeah,
I've grown very accustomed to these beautiful free tomatoes.
That's amazing. I hope to be at that level of gardening one day, but it's not this year.
Yeah. Okay. This is the girl I'm going to put in for Sophia since she's not here, is we are moving forward with a fertility retreat for listeners, clients. It's going to be small, and we like alluded to it, but we actually hired the person that's going to help us plan it so that not only is it way better than Sophia or I could make it, they're going to be on site with us, facilitating it so that Sophia and I can really be with people and be present.
Cool.
And we like got way more of a framework, and I'm really excited about what we're planning. And by the time this episode airs, we'll probably be ready to actually enroll for our first round of it. And we're
so cool.
This is like a dream and a girl of like getting in front of people face to face in this like weird COVID online business world that we have all been thrust into. And now I'm never leaving because it's really nice to work from home and work with people everywhere. But so I'm excited about that, and just some fun surprises we have in the works for that. So it's moving forward.
That's really amazing. I can't wait to hear about that. You'll have to send me some deets, but
I will.
That deserves a girl for sure. It's no joke to put that on, and I'm so excited.
Yeah. It's not going to be as big as what I saw you do. We're going to
I wouldn't
start
recommend
really
doing that
slow.
the first time anyways.
Yeah.
Almost.
Are you like me? You're like, I have a great idea. Let's just run full force with it. And then afterwards you're like, wow, that like took everything I had out of me.
It did.
And I shouldn't do 4 of those things at once.
Yes. Yep. That is me.
Oh man, me too, girl. Well, we're going to be besties after this. Guys, if you loved this episode, if it was helpful for you, if you want to hang out with Sophia and I and Kaely more often, review, subscribe, please rate us, share it with a friend. We will see you next week with a fresh episode. Bye.
Bye.
Hey, it's Sophia. If you love the show and want to continue your health and fertility journey using our resources, head on over to foodfreedomfertility.com for show notes, links to products and services, information about our guests, and our newsletter. Again, that's foodfreedomfertility.com. Thanks for listening.